All right, this is kind of a weird situation, but we're going to start doing stuff on, I'm going to start screen recording things like the PowerPoints, and I'll put them on Classroom, and then we'll do that this is kind of how we're going to go about it, okay? First thing I want to talk about is the Google Groups. So I invited you all to everyone in world history to a group, and it's basically where we're going to have our discussions. On the first part of Classroom, there's an announcement that talks about that, okay? So when you should have an email, and I know you've been bombarded by emails probably in the last week or 3 days. You'll have an email that says something about a Google group has been started or whatever. You go in there and you join it, and it should be just fine. I mean, I can resend invites, that's fine. But email me if you cannot get in, and I'll try to resend it, or I'll try to add you directly. It's a little bit tricky, but I think it'll be a good way to have some sort of a discussion. And that's how we're going to go about it. We're going to have, everybody has to post. I'll have a couple questions up there. You have to post your question or your answer, and then you have to reply to 2 other people in your class. So that's going to be how some of our grading will go, and our discussion amongst each other, which is fine. It seems like, and that's something that they do at Kirkwood a lot, so for their online classes. So maybe some of you will be more familiar with it next year when you start taking Kirkwood classes online. I'm going to probably try to get a lecture like this on a fairly daily basis. We might just have some questions and some small readings, but we'll see. We'll kind of work how it goes. But after the lecture, I'll have questions about it. And if you want to take notes, I would advise that. But I obviously can't make you, I guess I can't require you to take notes because I'm not there. But I'm going to have questions about the PowerPoint. So what I will do is I would, if I were you, I would take notes while we're going through, just like you normally would. And then it'll make it easier for the questions. It'll make it easier for the test that comes up eventually, right? We'll have a test in, probably 3 weeks. So we'll see how that plays out. But, with everything going on, we'll obviously play that by ear. But maybe we'll do a little writing instead of some sort of a summative type test. And the last thing I want to talk about is, yes, the Revolution projects. Since it's all online, I would like you to be able to still communicate with your partner, and you can still do those projects. All right. I will have a rubric set up a little more detailed. Probably today I will try to get that all finalized. So that's something that I'd still like you to do, because I think we'll be able to, once we get it all done, we'll share it out to everybody, and then we can all, even if we're not here physically at the school, we can at least have that information, so when we come to a test, we'll be good with that, okay? So that's kind of just the layout of what we're going to do, and now we're going to kind of start. We talked about the Enlightenment. We talked about kind of what a revolution is and what kind of starts a revolution in general. And now we're going to start digging into this kind of big one in history, the French Revolution. So the French Revolution is kind of an interesting one, because if we think of the things that every revolution would kind of have, the French Revolution is kind of like, oh yeah, this is very evident that these things occurred. When we're talking about these powerful elites that were kind of angry at the king, and especially the economic instability, or the state crisis with the French. You'll see when we start talking about this social system they have, it's pretty clear that people were, if you weren't wealthy, you were getting kind of screwed in the deal. So if you look at this first picture on the slides, this is kind of what it was. I mean, they had the military there. The military was kind of backing the people, because when we start looking at this system, the people and pretty much everyone is in one category, okay, out of the 3 they have. And this is kind of how their whole revolution went. I mean, they had somebody that they didn't like. They used this new contraption, this guillotine right here, the big wooden deal. I don't know if you can see my mouse doing that. I'm sure you can. And, you know, this is King Louis, the nice little head that's been taken off of his body, and they're showing it to the crowd. It's kind of a, I don't know, it's just a really perfect picture of what the French Revolution was. It was a violent, bloody revolution, okay? Come on. There we go. So, when we're talking about the French Revolution, we really have to know a little bit about the background of the American Revolution. And you guys had that in U.S. history last year. Well, really the inspiration for the French Revolution came because of the Americans. The French really supported the Americans in independence, or at least the fight against the British, because the French and the British have hated each other for a long time. So the French were on the American side, and when you start looking at like the Marquis de Lafayette, he's a guy we'll talk about, he's a French general, and he and Thomas Jefferson are like super good buddies. I mean, when I went to Jefferson's home 2 years ago, he actually has a painting of Lafayette in his house. So, you know, these two people were very close, and that definitely helped for the French coming over and helping the Americans. I mean, we've always had a pretty good relationship with France for the fact that they help us against the British. You know, when Napoleon takes over France, we have this big section of the Midwest and the West that is French controlled, basically everything west of the Mississippi, and we buy it from Napoleon for a very minimal amount compared to what it was really worth. And, you know, he just wanted to get rid of it, and they were kind of in an economic downturn, so he sells it to the Americans, and we have, you know, that's why we live in the state of Iowa, so not in basically a French colony. All right, so our state system. If you look back at the hierarchy, we talked about the Middle Ages, you will see how clearly this is connected. I mean, these two are the same ideas, where we have these levels of status and wealth too, right? So the first estate is this religious group, the clergy. Basically, they lived a very comfortable lifestyle, and weirdly enough, the first estate was not taxed. It was only 0.5% of the population of France. So this is really something that starts, when we start looking at like what the third estate is, you'll see like, wow, people were probably really pissed. And I mean, if I were in an estate, it'd definitely be the third estate. It would not be the first two, you know. So unless I guess I went to be a clergyman just to not to pay taxes, apparently. But this is really the idea that the bottom gets kind of the shaft in a lot of these deals. And it's the same way with hierarchy. When you think back to that, it's really this system of almost inequality, okay? Moving on. So yeah, the second estate is made up with this nobility. And with the hierarchy, you have the many more levels, or like sections, I guess. But with the French social system, with this estate system, it's really just broken into three groups. And I guess you could say four, but the two groups are within the third estate. So it's really not even just four. It's really this three level system. And this is anybody with wealth, military officials. So you have a lot of people that are even helping the Americans in the Revolutionary War that are in the second estate. And even some of them that support the revolution are in this estate, okay? Again, they weren't taxed, and they made up 1.5% of the population. So far we've seen no tax, no tax. and we have 2% of the population so far in our first two estates. And again, these people were really born into this estate. So if you're wealthy and you have a kid, that kid's going to be in this estate. I mean, the clergy, you can get into the clergy. That's a thing that people, they train their lives to do that, and that's something that they do. It's very common. I mean, even today, you can get into be a clergyman. That's not an issue, all right? But it's something you do for a life. It's not like something you just go to do for a year, and then you come back out of it, generally. It's something you got to commit to. So far, make this a note. First estate, no taxes. 0.5% of the population. Second estate, no taxes. 1.5% of the population. So we have no taxes and we have 2%. All right, third estate. Now this is where things get a little hairy. So it's made up of these peasants and this is the poor estate. All right, and that second word is the bourgeoisie. And if you ever read the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, he talks about the bourgeoisie as kind of this working class. Okay. So this is 98% of the population. And ironically, the poorest people were the ones in France that got taxed by the church and the government. And I'll show you a chart here in a second that shows the amount of taxation that happens with these people. It's incredibly insane. So the bourgeoisie was the higher of these two, like I was saying. It could be broken up into four almost, but it's just three. So it's the higher of the third estate. It's kind of like middle class almost. And it consisted of doctors, lawyers, merchants, anybody that had a little bit of like status, but not enough status to be like a wealthy noble. And this is the chart I was talking about. So if you look at the population, and the light blue is clergy, first estate, dark blue, almost purple, is the second estate, it's the nobility, and the third estate is the commoners and the bourgeoisie. So if you see this, it seems just insane. So 0.5% of the population with the clergy, you have 10%, they own 10% of the land. So 0.5, less than 1% of the people own 10% of the land in that country, and they don't get taxed at all. 1.5% of the people own a quarter of the land in France, and they don't get taxed at all. 98% of the population in France owns 65% of the land, which, yeah, 65% seems like a lot. But then again, you're almost the entire population of France, and you own barely over 50% of the land. And they get taxed 100%. They're the only ones paying taxes, and they're the poorest people in the country. So if you can think, oh man, the economic instability would be insane. It wouldn't even make no difference, really in their taxes, because these people are so poor they can't pay taxes. It's insane to think about. And you think of today's system where a lot of times we try to let the poorest people pay less than the wealthier people. And when you start looking at like some of the newer or some of the Democratic candidates, you have, a progressive tax, which means that the poorer people pay less or minimal, maybe nothing. And the wealthier people, it goes up as you increase wealth, in your yearly income. Well, that's not how they did it in France. And we'll see that it is just it's kind of a disaster of a system. So the causes of the French Revolution is this internal struggle, or international struggle, I apologize, for, an empire, okay? And it really takes away their ability to have resources. I mean, they try to build this empire, but really when you start thinking about it, even with Rome, and that's 1,000 years before this, even with Rome, they got stretched out too thin, And they didn't have the resources to have this empire. Well, the French really tried to do that too. Granted, they didn't get to that extent of Rome, but later on we start looking at Napoleon, they do get to that extent. And he isn't able to consistently stay strong. Political conflict. So the conflict between this monarch and the nobility. And they're trying to reform the tax system because the monarch, Louis XIV, really does, if you would think of him as a king of the people, he is much more of a king of the people than his predecessor. So his dad and his grandpa were not. They were these, what you would think of as like an absolute monarch, like Henry VIII type, right? We talked about Henry VIII being this, very strong person, but the thing is, he wasn't in trying to benefit the people. He was trying to benefit himself. And Louis XIV, who ends up getting his, on the front page, on the first slide, where the guy's holding his head up, that's Louis XIV. All right, well, obviously it was too little too late, but they're trying to reform this tax system, and it led to bankruptcy. So because the monarch and the nobility are struggling, there's struggles between the two. Whenever you're dealing with the wealthy people in the country, it's hard to get change. And the Enlightenment, we just talked about that. So this impulse for reform, and it really gets these political conflicts kind of like, this struggle is really, really tense. And we have the idea that, all these writings from John Locke or Thomas Hobbes or Montesquieu, these people are really part of the reason that we see this stuff boiling over the top. For thousands of years prior to this, they didn't, because these people didn't, the poor people didn't have a reason to revolt. I mean, they did, but they didn't have the incentive or the drive. And none of this stuff boiled over the top and really pushed the people to do it. Social hostility was another one. And it's kind of between this second estate and the middle class, this bourgeoisie that are the top of the third estate. They're struggling because the bourgeoisie are these people that are important status figures when you're talking about doctors, lawyers, business owners, and the aristocracy and the nobility. They're just wealthy people that were born into wealth. So there was a lot of tensions between the two because the bourgeoisie were the ones that kind of worked for that ability to get into that position, and the nobility didn't. They were just born. They just happened to be born. Okay? Oh, I apologize. Louis XVI, not Louis XIV. Louis XIV was the grandpa, or the dad. Sorry, I get my Louis mixed up because there's obviously 16 Louis, and it's a disaster of a time for these Louis. But so he's kind of an ineffective ruler. He really tries to be. I really see him as trying to be too progressive for the time and for the situation, and he just really didn't have the ability to rule. He was just, legitimately kind of just a I don't even know what he just was. He wasn't strong. He just kind of was there, and he benefited from generations of wealth. And it was just Louis. He was just there. And his wife, Marie Antoinette, we'll look at her a little bit. She's more of a driving force behind why people wanted to revolt than Louis was, really. She was a little bit antagonistic and loved the money and basically the nice things. And then economic hardship. So there was an agrarian crisis, so this agricultural crisis in 1788 and 1789, and people get more pissed because they don't have food, they don't have money, they have nothing. So they're basically starving, and it's just another reason they're trying to revolt. Okay? So this is kind of where we're going to stop for today, and I'll post. I really, really want you guys to be able to get on Google Groups. Please let me know if you can't. I will try to figure something out, but I'd like you to try to do that today because I'm going to post a discussion question on there. I will also post it on Classroom, but I'd like to get a discussion, or at least put something on there that you guys can respond to, okay? And we'll see how it works. It's my first time using it, so we'll see how it goes, and hopefully it's very smooth. But thanks for listening, and if you have questions, email me. You know, hopefully we're doing okay at home and not getting too crazy, but it's going to last for a while. So do things that you can do to kind of help yourself stay sane. I'm doing the same at home, so it's something. So you have a good day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.